Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of Castle Church in Wittenberg, Germany on October 31, 1517. His goal was to engage in debate and bring the teachings of the Church into conformance with the Word of God. The call to reform the Church launched a revolution, and the sides had to choose between papal decrees or the Word of God. Today, churches are turning to mystical channeling through books like Jesus Calling, and following Franciscan friar Richard Rohr and the occultism of the Enneagram to gain spiritual knowledge not found in Scripture. Celebrity pastors are calling to unhitch from the Old Testament.
Peter, James, Paul elected to unhitch the Christian faith from their Jewish scriptures. And my friends, we must as well. And I'll tell you why. It's actually the same reason they did. Because we must not make it difficult for those Gentiles who are turning to God. They didn't. We shouldn't either.
Welcome to the Fellowship of the Book as Dr. Donald Williams guides us as we embark on his 95 Theses for a New Reformation, a roadmap for Post-Evangelical Christianity.
Welcome. Donald Williams is in the house.
Woohoo!
At least for this week.
You might wonder why Christian education needs to participate in this new Reformation that we'd like to see, because it's public education that needs to be reformed, doesn't it? I mean, people are fleeing public school for private schools, Christian schools, and homeschooling. And, well, the reason that Christian education needs reformation is that the Christian school is the stepchild of the church. We think we ought to be doing it, but unfortunately, we too often are doing it for negative reasons, and we don't support it financially in such a way that we can actually do it as well as we should be doing it. Practically every Christian school I know of has a terrible time retaining good faculty because they don't pay them a living wage. And eventually, as their family begins to grow, they just don't have any choice but to go and do something else. And we do it for negative reasons, not positive reasons. Before I retired, I used to ask my freshmen at Toccoa Falls College, Christian college in Northeast Georgia, I used to ask them to write an essay about why they came to Toccoa Falls College. And for one reason, I wanted to know, and for another reason, it's slightly less boring than what I did on my summer vacation. And I was, over the years, I got really consistent answers that I was really disturbed by. They came to Toccoa Falls College. The answer I was given more than all other answers put together was they came to Toccoa Falls College to escape the evil influence of the secular university. Now, secular universities increasingly do have a lot of evil influence that's worth escaping. But the problem is it's a negative reason. They came to Toccoa Falls College to hide. And why didn't anybody ever give the reason I was looking for? I came here because Toccoa Falls College is the West Point for Christian soldiers. A positive reason for being there. So we need to definitely up our game. We need to up our game in terms of our concept of what we're doing and in terms of the way we support it. We give lip service to its importance, but we don't support it in such a way that either Christian day schools, high schools, or colleges can really thrive and really do what God's called them to do. Every year there's another Christian college that closes because it's economics. We're all worried about the federal government maybe under the next president, making it impossible for us to function biblically. You either embrace LGBTQ2 and transhumanism or lose your federal funding. And, most of our students, if they didn't have federal money, wouldn't be able to be there. So Christian education is something we need to talk about. And I'm going to start basically from the beginning. If we can get the slideshow up, we will take a look at the first of our 5 theses on Christian education. And my first thesis is a bold statement, a hot take. I'm saying that secular education is an oxymoron. An oxymoron is a foolish person that goes to Oxford University. No, an oxymoron is a figure of speech in which you put 2 contradictory things together, like cold fire or loving hate or military intelligence.
Jumbo shrimp.
Yeah. Put 2 things together that don't belong, that seem like they don't belong together. And so I'm saying secular education is an oxymoron. There's no such thing. Because every curriculum flows from and reflects an understanding of who man is and what his purpose is. And this understanding cannot be spiritually neutral. It will either serve true religion or false religion. Now, in theory, our public schools are religiously neutral, right? They're not supposed to support any religion or any denomination above any other. And so they're not going to be Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, Pentecostal, Lutheran, they're not going to be Christian, Muslim, Jewish, or Hindu. They're going to be just completely neutral. And that's the theory. But what happens when you try to operate based on this theory? What happens when you try to get specific about it? The neutrality vanishes in an instant. Okay? So, what do we want to achieve for our graduates? Well, surely we want them to be able to get good jobs, right? We want our graduates to be able to get good jobs. But, if they're lazy, undisciplined, untrustworthy, dishonest, their employers are not going to be happy with that. And so we discover that we can't just teach them the 3 R's and we just can't just teach them skills. We've got to teach virtue. All right. Well, if we're going to do that, and it's not just a matter of good jobs. Do we want them to be good citizens? Should education do anything to encourage that? Well, citizens of what kind of country? Okay. Ethical people of what ethics? Biblical ethics, Sharia law, secular pragmatism. I mean, you got to base it on something. Citizens of what kind of country? A country based on the premise that all men are created equal or endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, or a country based on the idea that that we're completely secular and we don't acknowledge any authority higher than the government itself. Do the rights come from God and the government is there to protect them, or do the rights come from the government? Guess what? Rights can only be inalienable if they're endowed by the Creator. Because what the government gives you, the government can take away.
Right.
So the alleged neutrality of this secular school evaporates very quickly as soon as you actually start trying to put your curriculum together and do anything with it. It's just not possible because it has to be based on something. And since it can't be based on any particular religion, it can't be based on Christianity or Judaism or Islam or Hinduism, guess what? it ends up being based on atheism. Now, it doesn't say it is, but since you can't be Christian or anything else, then what you do is you teach every subject as if God doesn't matter.
Right.
In other words, even if you don't say atheism is true and that's what we're teaching, you're teaching as if it were. You don't have any choice, because once you move off of that, then your neutrality has disappeared. So there is no such thing as secular education as the public school system wants you to think they understand it.
You know,
It's
sometimes
based
when
on something. It's either based on true religion or false religion. And atheism, of course, is a false religion. Don?
yeah, I was just wanting to kind of follow up on your point that you don't have to say God doesn't exist because you're teaching a positive against that anyway. So it'd be like watching the late Carl Sagan open a show with the universe, the cosmos is all there is, all there was, and all there ever will be. We are just stardust. Now, he hasn't said God doesn't exist, but everything he has said leads you to believe God doesn't exist.
Right. God is treated as irrelevant because you can't bring him in.
Right.
That's just the way it is. So when we were a country with a strong Christian consensus, then it was easy not to realize this. Public schools in Fulton County, Georgia, Fulton County school system, which is one of the counties of Atlanta. I went to high school in that system. And at Lakeshore High School, I graduated in 1969. Back in the 1960s, we started every day with a reading of a passage of scripture and prayer broadcast over the PA system to every homeroom. Students volunteered to lead those. And guess who was motivated to do the volunteering? The Christians. And so it was a good thing. But would we want to go back to that today? Think for a moment before you say yes. Because today, if a Muslim or a Hindu or a Mormon or Jehovah's Witness,
A Satanist,
wanted to volunteer and participate, they would have to let them. They have to treat them all the same.
Right.
And at best, you would have confusion, and at worst, all religion would end up just it. When we had the consensus, you could get away with it. When we had that strong Christian consensus, even people who weren't saved, even people who weren't individually Christians or only nominal Christians, accepted that we were a Judeo-Christian nation,
Right.
and that the Bible was a good book, the good book, and it was basically right about right and wrong. That consensus is gone, and you can't pretend that it's still there. And so the degradation of public education, and of course, it still varies. It will depend how aggressive it is in the promotion of secular thinking, varies from school to school, from school district to school district, and from one part of the country to another. Some places it's extremely hostile. Others, some of the elementary schools out where I live, out in the middle of nowhere in Northeast Georgia, are still pretty much run the way they were 50 years ago. But by and large, as the Christian consensus in the culture as a whole dissipates, it becomes impossible to pretend that secular education, if you mean by that neutral education that pretends to not to be anti-religious, just non-religious, it's a contradiction in terms.
Right.
Hey,
Not-
Don,
True.
I was going to ask you a question. Was America like the last place that was happening? Like right now, is there any nation on earth, in Europe or any little thing that is still teaching like you were saying, some prayer about the Christian, the God of the Bible in school? No place on the planet, maybe, huh?
Africa.
Ah.
I'll be going to Uganda soon on a mission trip. The director of our mission used to, he was a Presbyterian minister, and he normally did not wear a clerical collar. But when he went on a mission trip to Uganda, he had one and he would wear it because he would get through customs a lot easier that way. Because Uganda is a majority Christian nation and one that still respects Christianity. So yeah, in the West, I don't know of any country that's left. America held out longer than most of the rest of the West, but we are very much catching up nowadays. But yeah, in the third world, you can find some countries still where now education in Uganda has other issues, but hostility to Christianity isn't one of them.
Interesting.
There.
Okay. Kind of going off of what Don Veinot said earlier about, it made a little joke about a Satan school, but how would that really look any different than what we have? And so many of our schools are just that horrible. They might not be praying openly to Satan, but everything else lines up perfectly.
Well, actually, there are some schools with clubs run by the Satanic.
Clubs, yeah.
And
Satanic clubs, yeah.
at best, when you're trying to be neutral, atheism ends up being the default setting.
Right.
Because you have to teach everything as if you don't have to say God doesn't exist, but you teach everything as if he doesn't matter.
Right.
Right.
And that's the way the curriculum is inevitably going to be. And so you spend 8 hours a day in an environment where God doesn't matter. And then you spend 1 or 2 hours a week in an environment where he does. This is not a viable strategy for bringing your children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord.
Well, it's interesting because we have Common Core curriculum, and that is totally based off of a spiritual worldview. It is not, it doesn't necessarily default to atheism at all. So it's something that is completely, they try to pull the wool over your eyes and make you think that it's atheistic, the good for all, but it's not.
No. And the public schools have other issues. I mean, they're not unrelated. They're just not what we're talking about tonight.
Right.
They don't teach the basics of reading, writing, and arithmetic very well.
Right.
I taught a course called Grammar for Teachers for the English, taught it for the teacher ed department. They wanted their graduates to be competent in grammar. And so this was a junior class. And the kids from the public school, about half of them at the beginning of the semester, not only could they not name the parts of speech, half of them didn't even know what a part of speech was.
Oh,
These people are high school graduates with A's and B's in English, and they were hearing the phrase parts of speech for the very first time in their life in my class. Parts of speech are things like verbs and nouns and adjectives and adverbs, etc. And it wasn't just that they couldn't remember all of them. they didn't even know what one was. I mean, I'm starting from zero,
Yeah.
trying to get these kids a high school education before they graduate from college. And the homeschool kids and the private school kids, whether they were Christian private schools or not, they knew that stuff. They had to take the class, but they didn't even hardly need to. Some of them could have taught it. And so the dumbing down of the curriculum
Yes.
is a huge issue. It's not the issue I'm talking about tonight, but don't think it's not there and it's not part of the problem.
Right.
But we're focused on the more philosophical issues tonight. And so the first thing to be sure about is that we realize that the secular model is simply not going to work. You can't fix it. You can't fix it. It's by its very nature going to be a problem. Now, thesis number 2 pretty much follows from that. You cannot educate a human being unless you know what a human being is and what it is for. Okay? So, if your concept of what a human being is that we are an animal that evolved by chance, that we are just another animal, like we're just another, like a bonobo with opposable thumbs and a couple of more convolutions in our brain, just one more evolutionary step down the road, and then the purpose of your life is whatever you want it to be. And so if that's your concept of what a human being is, then what are you going to do? You throw a smorgasbord at him and let him pick up wherever he wants. On the other hand, if we are created in the image of God to rule the earth for him and to serve him and to glorify him and to know him and to love him, well, obviously, you can't make a single decision about your curriculum, your methodology, or anything until you've answered this question. And every single school and every single class is based on an answer to this question, even if the teacher has never thought about it. Okay? It will mostly default to the evolutionary setting. So, what is a human being? What is a human being for? What are we preparing these people for? Mere vocational training reduces man to a purely economic, that is, secular and material creature. So if your concept of education is job training, okay, we want these people to be able to go out and get a job, right? Now, obviously, that's one of the things an education should accomplish, because we serve God through our calling, our vocation. And we need to be able to make a living. We need to be able to make a living at doing something that is culturally valuable and adds value to society, to other human beings. But if vocational training is it, if you consider things like philosophy and literature, and music fringe, not necessary, because you're just doing vocational training, you're telling me that you're conceiving of man as a purely economic animal. And that's a secular view. He's just a material creature who wants to go out and make material money. Like Madonna, they're material girls and material boys. And so you've got to decide what you think a human being is, because everything is based on that. what are we training these people for? What do we want them to be able to do? What do we want them to be when they graduate? Are we developing economic machines? Are we developing full human beings who will glorify God in the totality of their being? And so, if you weren't with us for our week on Christianity and culture and our week on the Christian mind, I would really urge you to go back and watch those episodes, because these three, Christianity and culture, the Christian mind, and Christian education, really are all intimately related and are various facets of one reality, which is the development of the human being to be what God intended us to be. So you can't have a neutral school because it's going to be based on some view of what man is, and every view of what man is ultimately religious in character.
Right.
It's creation or it's evolution. Those are the two main options in the West, and it makes a huge difference. It's impossible to overstate the amount of difference that it makes. Okay, so
And that's some of the things we're experiencing in our political battles, and many don't realize it. Is it really is a battle for who is it that sets the morals and ethics for a nation? Those things are at risk, and they come out of the schools in their teaching or lack of teaching on these issues from a good, solid biblical standpoint. So,
absolutely. Okay, thesis number 3. Here we go. So, what is our view of who we are, of what we're trying to educate? Human beings were created in the image of God to enjoy him through fellowship with him and to glorify him by serving him as his deputies and regents in the ruling care of the earth. We were created to worship and serve God in terms of our position of stewards of the planet. In a fallen world, this of necessity includes the Great Commission. Okay. If we'd never fallen, we wouldn't need to be making disciples of Jesus out of people who are serving other gods or serving themselves. But in a fallen world, the Great Commission is an essential part of that. We were created in the image of God to enjoy him through fellowship with him and to glorify him by serving him as his deputies and regents in the ruling care of the earth. Now, that means I need an understanding of certain things. Okay. I need to know about science, because how am I going to take care of creation if I don't know how it works? I need to know something about history, because how am I going to function as a leader in the care of creation? I can't just, certainly I want to take care of the little bit of it that is under my control. But if I'm really concerned about the health of the planet, then I got to be concerned about the health of the nation and about the way people as larger groups impact the planet. We got to be able to make political decisions, and we got to be able to vote wisely. In order to do that, we have to know something about political science and civics. We have to know something about history, because all of the problems that we face didn't just pop into existence out of a pressurized can that somebody pulled the lid off of. They all came to be the way they are. They all have a history, and a history of people thinking and arguing and talking about it, you got to know something about philosophy, certainly theology. You got to study the Bible. And in order to be effective in all these roles, then you need some other things as well. In the ancient world, there were basically two kinds of education. Education broke down into two categories because there were basically two kinds of people, slaves and free men. Think about a city-state like Athens, for example. In ancient times, Athens was a big city then. It wouldn't have counted as a big city today. It would have been more like a small town, maybe 20,000 people. Well, half of them are women. Okay, so they're not, obviously we're not going to let them vote. We're talking about ancient times. I'm not making a statement about women voting today. I'm just telling you what it was like. Okay, so you got slaves, you got free people. What's the difference? A slave is a person who's defined by his job. Okay, now ancient slavery was different from the kind of slavery we had in the United States a couple hundred years ago. It wasn't based on race, and some slaves had pretty nice jobs. I mean, slaves did things like work as accountants or work as teachers. If you had a slave, maybe you get to be a slave by being a prisoner of war. So, in modern, enlightened, civilized countries, we put them in concentration camps. But now, in ancient times, if you were a prisoner of war, you might get sold as a slave. And let's say you'd been a school teacher before you got drafted into the army and lost the war and ended up a slave in this other country. And so the guy might put you in charge of homeschooling his kids. That would be your job. Okay. So some slaves had nicer jobs and nicer lifestyles than some free people. But what's the difference is the slave is defined by his job. He has no rights or no meaning in that society other than to fulfill his job. Okay. If you're a free person and you don't like your job, you can quit. The slave doesn't have that option. Totally defined by his job. The other big difference between a slave and a free person is the slave can't vote. So if you're a citizen of Athens, a free Athenian, then you have the vote. This is a big deal because let's say, there's 20,000 people. Well, half of them are women. So you're down to 10,000. Half of those are slaves, 5,000. And a whole bunch of the ones that are left aren't of age yet. So you end up with only a couple of thousand, maybe, free citizens who can vote, which means a single individual, like I have 1/200 millionth of the say in America when I go to the polls. 1/2000th is way different from 1/200 millionth because it's not just my vote, but if with this small community of people who are doing that, one person who persuades just a few other people to agree with him can change the course of history.
Right.
Right? So, two kinds of education. For slaves, we're going to give the slave a really good vocational education. Let's say I've got a slave that's good at math, and so I'm going to use him as an accountant in my company. I'm going to send him to North Georgia Tech and get him the best training in accounting and math that I can possibly give him. But I'm going to waste money teaching him history or literature or philosophy because he's got no opportunity to use any of that stuff. It's a waste of my resources. It's only just going to make him more frustrated with his position in life. But my son, who's also going to be an accountant in my company, going to do the same job, he's not going to the vocational school. He's going to the university because he's going to be a leader of the society. That is, he not only has to do his job well, he also has to understand economics and history, military science, political science, and he has to be able to use language. So we're gonna expose him to literature also. The curriculum for the free man was based on the trivium: grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Grammar, how to say something. Logic, how to say something valid. Ultimately, how to say something true. Rhetoric, how to say something well. Because if you master that, you can study any topic you need to, and you can draw conclusions, and you can effectively persuade others to accept those conclusions, and you can be effective as a citizen in a society. So, I told my freshman who basically wanted vocational training, they're like, maybe they're going to be a youth leader. And so they want to study Bible and they want to study Christian ed courses. But why do I have to take literature? Why do I have to take math? Why do I have to take science? Well, you've got a slave mentality, my friend. You're thinking like a slave. And we don't have slaves anymore, but you're acting like one and thinking like one if that's the way you're thinking. Because I was created in the image of God to represent God on this planet in every area of life. And so I need a broad-based, I need an education that's broad and deep and that has the Bible giving me the plumb line in the middle of it that I can line everything up with to see what's true and where we're going. Your concept of what people are determines your approach to education. And so, yeah, we want people to have job skills, but there's a lot more to it than that. And there's a reason why we're preparing them to be leaders in the church and in society. Because education is a privilege. And, this is the way we need to be thinking about it. Okay, let's think about where this goes from here. Thesis number 4, Christian education develops the whole person to glorify God in every area of a whole life. It includes, but cannot be limited to, training for employment. Viewing education and in only economic terms is a denial of the image of God. So I'm in this Christian college. I got all these kids from Christian homes and churches, and they think like slaves because all they want to know is why do I have to take this course? Is it going to make me any money after I graduate? Well, okay. I mean, I don't mind you being concerned about that, but there's more to life, than that. And why are we thinking of ourselves as if we were just economic cogs? Why aren't we thinking of ourselves as people created in the image of God to represent Him on this planet? And we are a small segment of the general population, shrinking. And those who have the privilege of having received real education are a small segment of that, which means if you are being educated, you need to think in terms of you're being given the opportunity and the privilege of preparing yourself to be a leader in the church, a leader in the general larger society.
I have another question, Don. I want to draw on your experience. So you were there doing that. So was it like half of the students that you pointed this out to that then said, "Oh, thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, now I'll enjoy that class"? Or did they still be like, I'm still not convinced. I still don't want to take the class because I mean,
I wish it was half of them.
Okay.
There were some that really got division. I mean, they'd never thought about that before.
Yeah.
And they embraced it, but it wasn't half.
Okay.
That I would say more like maybe 20%. A lot of them would just look at you like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I just made a comment to Morgan. I was like, math, Morgan, because she begged me next year, Mom, no more math. I'm done. No, you're not.
So
done.
they had prioritized God, though. They were there at that school, kind of, pretty much prioritizing the Lord. Yes or no?
Well, yeah, it ranged everything from top-notch Christian kids who had a calling from God and were pursuing it to people who were there because their parents wanted us to fix them. And everything in between.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you had people who did not want to be there. Their parents made them come. Their parents wouldn't pay for them to go anyplace else because their parents wanted them to have a Christian education, but they basically didn't want to be here, and they got themselves kicked out as quick as they could, or got themselves flunked out as quickly as they could. And then you had the really fine Christian young men and women, and you had everything in between. You had people that were serious Christians, but they'd been raised in an anti-intellectual Christian subculture, and they thought of being a missionary or being a youth leader or being a pastor as basically a job. Now, it's an important job, and we want to be good at it, but if something's not directly related to that, then why do I have to take this? So they're most of them had never thought about any of this stuff at all. Yeah. When they wrote that essay about coming to Coa Falls to escape the evil influence of the secular university, that didn't represent their thinking because they hadn't done any. That was the thinking of their parents and their pastor and their youth director, their youth leader.
To offer a bit of a defense for people I've never met, I do wonder, to go to Coa Falls and hopefully get a good education, I can definitely see that. We're having this problem with MJ here. She's definitely brilliant enough to handle any college. But what college should we send them to? Why do I want to waste my time and my money and her time and her money going to a college where most of what they teach her isn't going to be true? You can fill your head full of all kinds of facts, but even 10% of them aren't true. You're just as dumb as the dumbest person sitting on the side of the street begging for money.
You could get a really good Christian education at a place like Toccoa Falls if you come in understanding that the nature of the beast is that not everybody in the student body is going to be there for that reason. Right. So the real thing that makes a difference is what circle of friends do you become part of? Mm-hmm. If your friends are people who are there for the right reasons, you will really appreciate what your professors are giving you, and you'll have a great time. But if you get in with people who are there for other reasons, then and you realize the student body of a Christian college is going to have a lot of really serious servants of God in it. It's also going to have a lot of people who are not there for the right reasons.
Right.
Their parents sent them there because they wanted us to do all that they had failed to do for the first
Right.
18 years of their life.
Right.
And so one of the problems is people come in expecting it's going to be like the Garden of Eden or something, because all these great Christians are going to be here, and there's a lot of them, but then there's a lot of other things too. And so don't get disillusioned by the fact that maybe half of your fellow students aren't there for the right reasons, but get in with the ones that are, and you'll get a great education. Now,
my point was more that it's more the professors that are the problem. I mean, Noam Chomsky was a professor. Elizabeth Warren was a professor. These
right.
are considered our intellectual bright lights,
Mhm.
but in fact, they're not very bright at all. And what do you do with that?
Well,
When what you're being taught is
Yeah.
incorrect, it doesn't matter how much they teach you if it's wrong.
Yeah. And just because it's a Christian college and has a reputation doesn't mean
Mm.
that the professors have got their heads on straight
Right.
in terms of sound doctrine, because there's been a lot of drift
Right.
in Christian colleges. What I did, and what I encourage people to do is, when I was deciding where I wanted to go to seminary, what I did was I narrowed it down to like about 4 schools that I was interested in that were my finalists. And then I went to the library and I started checking out books by the faculty and reading them and asking myself, which bunch of these guys do I want to spend the next 3 years studying with?
Mhm.
And, you can do that on the grad school level because everybody's going to be writing. On the undergrad level, not everybody will have books, but there will be faculty who have written, and you can get an idea of where they're coming from, whether it's sound and whether it's helpful, which are two things. You want both of those things to be true.
Mhm.
So, I would encourage investigating in college that way. Now, there are some majors that are going to mean you have to go to a secular university. If you want to do something fairly specialized, you can't major in that at most Christian colleges. Some things, maybe not any of them. And a secular university, if you are grounded before you get there, and if you have a really good apologetics oriented church in that college community that you're tied into, it can be a great experience because you have your guard up. You know that you're going to get a lot of secular ideology, but you tell yourself, I'm getting this from the horse's mouth. I'm going to get a great scouting report on the enemy. But I don't get in just naively and let myself be influenced by that. I got to be grounded in the word, stay that way, and be in with a solid church. If you do that, then a secular college is not a terrible choice. And another option is go to a Christian college for the first 2 years, get your core curriculum done there, and get some Bible, and maybe get your associate's degree, the 2-year degree, and then finish your major, your specialized major at the secular school. That's a good strategy as well. But we need to be thinking about these things, and unfortunately, a lot of families don't start thinking about it until way later in the process than they should.
Right.
And they approach it naively. They think, if it's a Christian school or a church school, it'll be okay.
It'd be great.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Oh, no.
For
Necessarily.
sure.
Okay. We got one more thesis to look at. If all these things are true, if secular education is an oxymoron, if you can't educate anybody without knowing what a human being is and is supposed to be, if we were created in the image of God to rule the planet for him, then if all that's true, then John Milton was right to say, this is Milton's definition of education from his essay on education: a complete and generous education is that which fits a man to perform justly, skillfully, and magnanimously all the offices, both public and private, of peace and war. A complete and generous education is that which fits a man to perform, or a woman nowadays, to perform justly, skillfully, and magnanimously. So justly, that's virtue. You got your ethics right. Skillfully, that's your job skills. Magnanimously, meaning in a grand and generous way, all the offices, the duties, the expectations that society has of you, both public and private, of peace and war. Whatever situation your country is in, you can rise up and do exemplary service. The Christian ladies and gentlemen should be prepared to glorify God in the home, the marketplace, the forum, and the church, as workers and as witnesses, as citizens, and as saints. There's Milton's statement and my statement. Glorify God in the home, the marketplace. The home is the family. The marketplace would be your work. The forum would be politics, public issues, and a church. To glorify God in all these places as workers and as witnesses, as citizens, and as saints. And if we could get students to think in these terms, if we could get parents and teachers to think in these terms, we don't need a ton of people. A very, very small remnant of people like this can really turn things around and can present the gospel with a power that we are not used to seeing in recent history. So we need to get this vision. And obviously parents are concerned about this because they got kids. But all Christians need to be concerned about this, because unless the church gets behind its schools in a way that it hasn't done yet, they're just going to be constantly trying to survive rather than trying to do the ministry that they're out there for, which is to be an arm of the church, to help the church. You got to have the parents, you got to have the extended family, you got to have the church and the school all working together. Each have their role to play. You can't just, the school's going to take care of that, or the church is going to take care of that. You got to have all of that. And then we have people that we send out who are ready and prepared and can speak with confidence and integrity and power into the issues of the day. And all of it comes back to the gospel, because Why are we wanting the economy to go well? Why are we wanting the environment to be cared for? It's all about the fact that it all belongs to God and glorifies Him. And He is the reason for it all. So, any
Amen.
further questions or comments as we
What-
wrap it up?
Yeah, I got one. In what year did we ever get this? The highest percentage. You're painting the perfect thing, right? So, what year in America did we get like 60% there? Is that the highest we ever got? In what year? Do you think we've been 75% there? You know.
About maybe what 1640.
Little by little, it's been degrading.
That- when Harvard and Yale and Princeton were founded,
Mhm.
they were founded by people who thought this way, and we let that slip away.
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah, that was right before the Enlightenment or something, whatever period.
right. That was that was colonial days, pre-revolution.
Right.
But those schools were founded by people who thought like this. Jonathan Edwards was president of Princeton only for a few days, unfortunately, because he had a bad reaction to a vaccine and died. But yeah, now a lot of our current Christian colleges weren't founded necessarily with that big of a vision, because they came along later and they were reacting against the problems they saw in secular education necessarily, rather than necessarily building it up positively from the Bible as the foundation.
Right.
But even what they gave us is also slipping away. This is the nature of human institutions, that they stay faithful for a certain period of time, and then the slipping begins, and it begins slowly and gradually, and if you don't nip it in the bud, then it gets a momentum that you can't fight anymore. So vigilance, eternal vigilance is the price of freedom, and eternal vigilance is the price of education that has biblical integrity.
Yep. I recall back when I started teaching in Chicago, it was around the beginning of the 90s. When my daughter came to the school that I taught, and she was in 8th grade, and she came home with an assignment in science. It's a science assignment, but she had to write something out, right? Right. And so I was checking her spellings. I'm like, I'm a spelling bee. I got to make sure the grammar's right. So I said, hey, you got a couple of mistakes here. Goes, the teacher said I don't have to worry about spelling. They just want to know,
Right.
the basic idea of what I'm saying. I'm like, So I know I corrected it, and I said, no, well, I want you to write it the right way. You're not going to be a dum-dum.
And that's the other part of it.
Yeah, slippery.
One reason, the most important reason we need to build Christian education up so that it will be the kind of thing I'm talking about is theological and philosophical.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we've been talking about tonight. The other reason is that the public schools, many of them aren't doing the basic job.
No, not even.
When I was in the 8th grade in the Fulton County schools in Georgia, a comma splice, a fragment, or a run-on sentence was an automatic F.
Yeah.
If you had one of those errors in your paper, it didn't matter what else was there.
Yeah.
That paper was an F. For some reason, we quit doing those things in the 8th grade.
Right.
But then if I applied that standard to college students in the 20 and teens, I would have flunked half of the freshman class out of school, and we would have closed down for lack of their tuition money.
Well, yeah.
There's
you're trying to hold the line, but the public schools have just given up
Yep.
trying to teach the basics. You know why grammar school is called grammar school? Because originally that was where you learned your Latin grammar.
Yeah.
They didn't bother to teach English grammar because when you did the Latin grammar, which was harder, you got the other stuff. You know, like
Much easier.
and you know, it's just kids can do it if you expect it of them.
Right.
And if the culture expects it of them. I mean, if you're the only guy who's expecting it in the whole school, then you got a problem. You know, they're going to be resistant. But if they can do so much more than they do, and I meet kids who are homeschooled, kids from private Christian schools, classical Christian schools, all the time, who are running circles.
Mm-hmm.
I was at a conference a couple years ago. It was this ninth grader who'd been homeschooled his whole time, and he'd submitted a paper that got accepted at the conference, and it was better than some of the senior college papers that I mean, he would have gotten an A as a college senior for that paper. He's doing that in the ninth grade. Why? Because his education hasn't been wasted.
Right.
And so we got to not waste our time. And while we're not wasting our time, we've got to have that rigor that's there because it's motivated by the fact that we have the opportunity to glorify God with our minds.
Amen.
And that's what this is for. That's what this is ultimately all about. And that's why we care about these things.
Yep.
There was a case, I forget where this was, but some girl is now suing, I think it's a high school, because she managed to get into college even though she is actually illiterate. Like, she cannot read or write, but the public school that she was in just kept moving her up, kept moving her through school, because that's pretty much what it is nowadays. They don't care if you can't read. They don't care if you don't understand math or science. They just need to keep pumping kids through the system so that the taxpayers keep giving them money. That's all they care about.
I kept telling my kids that they needed to sue their high school for malpractice.
Yeah, for sure.
And they thought I was joking. I don't think anybody ever did it. I'm glad this girl is doing it.
It's becoming a serious
Yeah,
issue.
that's good.
Yeah.
And you're talking about the basic, like even cursive, like writing in cursive, they don't teach that anymore.
That's become
We do.
it's become a trend on TikTok. Gen Z has rediscovered cursive.
Good.
Now a challenge. Write your name without lifting your pen.
That's great.
Hey.
Yeah, no.
Cursive is well
But hey, that means that parents have a secret code they can
Exactly.
Yeah. Because the school where both of my girls went to, they know, but they learned on their own how to, like sign their name and so forth. Because I was telling them, hey, you need to, so yeah, like what you were saying, the parents are also involved in that. But I mean, kudos to that girl that's suing. She should. I mean, these people are ridiculous.
Last weekend, I was visiting a former student of mine that I'm very proud of because I was preaching in his church. I was visiting in his house. And his little 4-year-old son, Rowan, taught himself to read. I mean, somehow, obviously, his parents had been reading to him and everything, but he'd been paying attention, and he must have even figured out intuitively some of the phonics of it, because he freaked them out by reading the street signs in the car, which would be stuff he'd never seen before, right? They're driving down the road, and he says, "Jackson Street,"
That's funny.
And all of their kids are just incredible because their parents are letting them find their potential and encouraging them to do it and helping them to do it. And yeah,
such a rarity, but it's a treat to see it.
Develop your mind to the maximum for the glory of God.
One of the things that, this is just my opinion, I could be wrong, but I think it's true. Sometimes we look at a subject matter that we have to take in school, for example, and we think to ourselves, oh, we'll never use that. And it may be that particular element that you're learning, you won't use, but you're learning something else about how to do problem solving and think through issues and how you can apply stuff that you may not get in other ways. All comes through that discipline. So there's more to it than just the facts of, say, algebra, for example.
Right.
Now, I've never used calculus, but it was great mental calisthenics,
right?
And having done math at that level means that when I read certain text in science or physics, I can follow what the author's talking about, and I'm not just completely lost as I would be if I had never done that.
Right.
So, people have too narrow a concept of use when it comes to some of those things. Yeah.
Teaches focus, Corky says.
Yeah, that's one way to do it.
Teaches focus, and that's absolutely true.
It does. Yes, it does.
You know, and makes it more well-rounded. When we went to get our CDLs, I had been in construction for 40 years. I won't do that whole story, but when we went to do that, and I told Joy, okay, now not only do we have to get our CDL, but we have to get all of our endorsements, our doubles, our triples, our hazmats, and she said, why? I don't want to do that. I said, it doesn't matter. Number one, when you have them, it's going to make you more valuable. Number two, you will learn things about the business you're about to enter into that you won't know otherwise, and you'll be able to deal with those kinds of issues when they come up.
Right.
And then about 6 or 8 months into our driving, she was very glad she had those because those kinds of issues started coming up from time to time as we were picking up a load.
Yeah.
And she understood what it was then. So
you never know.
Never know. All right. And with that, we're about to wrap it up for tonight. Dr. Williams is he's wandering away for about 4 weeks.
Wandering in Africa.
He'll be wandering in Africa, not chasing tigers, I don't think, but training ambassadors.
Will he be singing that song, Lord, don't send me to Africa?
That is my song about missionary work.
Yeah.
I don't think I've got what it takes. I'm just a man. I'm not a Tarzan. Don't like lions, gorillas, or snakes.
I love that song.
So starting next Tuesday.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
God bless you.
So beginning next Tuesday for 4 weeks, we're going to be having a Christian view of Islam. A Christian view of Islam. A particular Christian, actually, Bill Hunsberger will be doing that. So
very good.
And if I said he's a peculiar Christian, that would be true also.
Yeah. We'll figure that out once we can get him in here.
Exactly so.
It won't take long.
Next week, 8 o'clock Central Time.
Peculiarity.
Oh yeah.
We will see you all then.
Awesome. Bye, y'all.